Good evening, friends. This is Brother Julius once again, right back here on Awesome God Radio. And we're thankful for you giving us this opportunity to come and share with you from the Word of God and from spiritual things. Thank you for allowing us to come into your radios, your living rooms, your computers, your cell phones,
Yes.
however it is that you listen to Awesome God Radio. Thankful for everybody who's joining us right here on Facebook. Let somebody know if you're on Facebook and you're checking it out that something great's about to happen right here on the Just Word Facebook Live. We are very, very excited about our topic. We're excited for another chance to be here. If you've been following the show, then either on Awesome God Radio or on Facebook or YouTube, then you know that we've been talking about something that is very, very prevalent in the church, yet so many folks are afraid to talk about it. We are not afraid to talk about kingdom issues right here on the Just Word Show. When it comes to the things of God, there's not many topics that I'm not afraid to address. I will address.
This is true.
I will address a lot of topics, most topics. But this is one right here that you have to almost put on a coat of armor, a suit of armor before you. You know, it's funny. I was talking to a pastor last night, and I told him what we were talking about on the show, and he was very, very excited. You mean to tell me you're talking about spiritual abuse on the show? I said, yes, I'm talking about spiritual abuse. He's like, oh my God, for real? I was like, yes, sir, we're talking about spiritual abuse on the show. And he was just so excited. And every time I share it with folks, folks are just excited. They're ecstatic and they are elated that I'm talking about this topic on the show. So friends, hey, share the show, let somebody know that we're talking about this issue. It is affecting a lot of people. It has affected a lot of people. Spiritual abuse and abusive churches. The church ought to be the place, friends, where you go for friendship, for familyship, for fellowship,
Yes.
for brotherhood, for prayer, for learning the Word of God, the place where you should experience grace, where you should give grace, the place where you should be safe to take your kids around the people of God. That's the way God designed His kingdom. Folks all encouraging each other to continue to live in the Spirit and walk in the Spirit and propelling and pushing each other to discover their gifts and talents, to bless the body of Christ and to reach the world.
Amen.
And to expand God's kingdom. All of us have gifts and talents. The church is the place often where we discover them. The church is the place oftentimes where we exercise them and when we are encouraged to continue to press on in the church or in the world. There are many ministries that will take place that won't be inside the church, but it's going to be church folks who do those ministries. And church ought to be a place of healing. It ought to be the balm for this world. It ought to be a hospital for the soul. And it ought to be a place of growth. It ought to be a place of healing, health, and encouragement. Oftentimes, folks come into the church, they let their hair down. Oftentimes, they have blinders on because they simply trust God's people. And oftentimes, and they should. They should. I don't fault a person who comes to church like that. They come in blind with blinders on. They don't know what to expect. Bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, excited, and happy filled all up with the Spirit. They want to learn. They want to grow. They want to love on folks. And they want to be loved on. They just want community. Because they simply trust that if there's any place I can let my hair down, it needs to be the church. And all of that is 100% true. But oftentimes people come into the church with good, pure motives and good, pure hearts.
Yes.
And they get crushed. They get crushed by the games. They get crushed by the politics. They get crushed by overbearing, domineering, authoritarian styles of leadership. They get blessed out from the pulpit. They get, all kinds of things, backstabbing, cutthroating. And friends, these things ought not to be. These things ought not to be. We have sheep who are abusing each other. We have friends of the pastors who are backstabbing and cutthroating other believers. We have people who want titles and positions that are posturing for titles and positions and fighting each other and backstabbing and cutthroating and throwing each other up underneath the bus because they want to be the next one who gets a title like bishop, deacon, elder, pastor, and I hate to take it here, but I've seen this in church. First lady. We have people who all want to be the first lady. And, if it's a pastor who's single, friends, this is not the picture of the body of Christ that the New Testament paints. We need to step higher. I don't come to lambast. I don't come to pound anyone into submission. But I just want to encourage us all together. We need to step higher. We need to do better. We need to be better representatives of the things of God. We're talking about spiritual abuse. It is alive. It is well. It is very commonplace in the body of Christ. God's house ought to be filled with love, fellowship, and support, grace, friendship, and family.
Amen.
If there's anywhere you should be able to let your hair down, oftentimes we can't let our hair down in God's house, and we have to keep our guards up because we have to be worried about who's telling the pastor on me, or who's going to twist my words, or who's going to tell their story first. But you know what, friends? I come with a word of hope that God is raising up a new generation of church leaders who love Him for real and who will serve Him and love on His people. I want to say to all pastors and church leaders, deacons, elders, ministers, bishops, if you get this video feed, if you get this show on Awesome God Radio, the radio, the app, if you see us on YouTube, read Ezekiel chapter 34. That might help you. Read 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1, 2, and 3, and 4, I believe. Those verses might help us, and it might help us with a ministry perspective. So with no further delay, we're going to get into the show. My wife has some things that she wants to share, then we'll get into some other things.
Amen. Thank you guys for tuning in again this week with the Just Word Show. I just wanted to really share this story. I believe will resonate with many of our listeners. For some, it will be kind of a walk down memory lane, and for others, it might be more of a learning or a teachable moment because perhaps they may not have ever heard the story or may not be familiar with this particular story. I call it a story, but really it's history. And I wanted to share, I think it's really very relevant to the topic that we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks. So, prior to the attacks of September 11th of 2001, so 9/11, prior to that, there was only one other tragedy that marked the single largest loss of civilian lives, and it wasn't a natural disaster. All right, so just hold that for a moment, put a little pin there, just bookmark that. So prior to 9/11, there was a tragedy that marked the single largest civilian lives, the largest loss, and it wasn't a natural disaster. The man, or should I say the megalomaniac that was behind this tragedy, was, yes, the itinerant preacher, faith healer named Jim Jones. And truthfully, if you really go back into the history, you'll see that he really came from humble beginnings. A self-ordained Christian minister, grew up in a very small town in Indianapolis. And, you know, he wanted to raise money to start the church. And so the history books tell us that he even sold monkeys from door to door, trying to raise money to start this ministry, which he believed God called him to start. So somewhere around the mid-50s, he opened up the first People's Temple in Indianapolis. And, you know, his congregation was really racially integrated, which was somewhat unusual in the 50s and in the Midwest. So 10 years later, the People's Temple moved to a small town. It's fairly still a small congregation. They moved to a town in Northern California. So 10 years later, around the early 70s, they move again to their headquarter location, which was in Los Angeles, California. And so, you know, if you, for those of you who can really remember, the 70s was a very a chaotic time in the world. If you think about it, it was an era where the civil rights movement, there was a lot of protests against the Vietnam War. You had the Martin Luther King assassinations that happened a few years before that. You had John F. Kennedy's assassination. You had Malcolm X and his assassination. So the world was really in chaos. People were looking for hope. So around the 70s, when he moved to San Francisco, a very ambitious preacher, he became a very powerful figure. He gained favor with the politicians, with the media, donated money to several charitable organizations. They had social and medical programs. They fed the needy. They had drug rehab and legal services, all from the People's Temple. Trying to do God's work. Wanting to do something meaningful and impact their community. The congregation grew. People were looking for hope. He was very charismatic. And so there's some reports that say that this probably is one of the very earliest mega churches, actually. Some report that in some cases that he may have had up to 20,000 followers. But somewhere along the line, this pastor, this faith healer, this civil rights leader, this pastor things began to get a little twisted. And some of the members were being forced to give up their belongings, their homes, even custody of their children. In some cases, they even were complaining of being beat, and there were fake healings taking place. And so then some of the attention that this ministry was getting, this pastor, became unfavorable. And so there began to be trouble. And so this pastor decided he wanted to take his congregation to a place where they could have utopia, a place where they could worship and live and exist and not have to worry about this persecution from the world. And so he took some of his followers, the ones that were willing to go. He purchased a tract of land in South America and took 1,000 temple members with him, looking to find this utopia, this paradise that their itinerant preacher and pastor had promised that they will find. Well, it wasn't very long. You know the story for those of you who are familiar. It wasn't long that their passports were confiscated and their cell phones, their phones, their phone conversations and their letters were being monitored. There were armed guards, and so their world began to decline. And so it's funny because, you wonder what caused those 1,000 members to follow such a charismatic man. And what happened to this self-ordained minister that led him astray? Self-ordained, and then that led those people astray. And for those of you if you remember the story, they drank the lethal cyanide Kool-Aid. Some were shot to death. So can you imagine the mothers and fathers giving their children this deadly drink? And they knew what they were doing. They had practiced these suicide runs before. The right night, they knew exactly what was about to happen. They were basically martyring themselves. They understood what was happening. And I know you say this is an extreme situation, and it is. But I think there are lessons that we can learn here about this charismatic leader. Although there probably hasn't been one that rivals him in our modern history. But there are some characteristics. There's some characteristics there, I think, that we need to be cautioned about, and some principles that when a leader abuses their authority and uses their influence for their own self-purposes and gain, that these are the type of catastrophic things that can happen, because it causes this type of disorganization and this spiritual disorganization, this chaos in the lives of members. So for those of you that know, 912 people lost their lives or either were murdered or suicide, whatever you want to call it, on that day. And about 300 of those were children. And there were of course there was a senator there looking into this utopia, this world, this Christian world that was taking place in South America, because there were concerns about manipulation and domination in this ministry. And so, again, I know it's an extreme story. It's a story that many of us will say that, he probably wasn't really a born-again Christian, or, perhaps, these were weak-minded people, or perhaps there was some other reason why this horrific event even happened. And perhaps we could all find all kinds of reasons to say why it happened and why it shouldn't have happened. But I think the principle is what we're trying to extract. The principle about overbearing, manipulating, and domineering type of leadership, and the impact and the influence that it can have on the followers.
I really think that is a very good example, even though it's extreme.
It is extreme, but it's true.
It's an extreme example, but it did really happen in real life.
Jonestown.
And it is a major, powerful, intense macrocosm.
Yeah. And the other principle I think too was that, in the beginning it appeared that he was a very dedicated, zealous man for the Lord. But somehow his distorted became thinking, and then he distorted the lives of hundreds of other people. And so, that I think that's the other principle as well I wanted to highlight, in this story, that, we have to be careful as followers, that we respect the office but call no man Lord.
Yeah, right. So I think what was so powerful about that, you almost said it. I almost don't even have to make the point, because you pretty much said it. That now let me just put it to you like this. I got saved and I became a committed Christian in 1986. Mm-hmm. And of course that's 32 years ago. And over the years, I've seen many a friend start churches. Mm-hmm. Many of those friends eventually closed their churches. Mm-hmm. Many of them are still pastors. Mm-hmm. I have a lot of friends who are pastors. A lot of friends who past tense were pastors. Mm-hmm. A lot of friends who are ministers, elders, couple of bishops, and whatever titles you want to say. But here's the point that including pastors that I have sat under.
Sure.
Many of whom start off well. Their heart is right. Their heart is in the right place. They love people. They love on people.
Yes.
Their heart is just to serve the Lord and to see people grow.
Yes.
And that should be the heart of a pastor. Is to serve the Lord and to see people grow. But something happens.
Yeah.
Something happens. We have to remember what Ephesians chapter 6 teaches. That there is a kingdom of darkness that wants to disrupt and upset and destroy anything that God does. Even if the pastor is called by God, there need to be certain fail-safes in place to make sure that man of God does not veer off to the right or to the left, but that he keeps his eyes on the prize. And I say with a little bit of sadness in my heart that I've watched my friends start churches and veer off to the right or to the left. And some of them I have in my cell phones but can't call them because they wouldn't receive anything from me. But they're always open to call me. I'm ready to love on them and show them grace. But some who I know are good men of God who loved the word and loved people, at least at one point, and something happened. They went astray. Now, friends, I'm not saying that this is your pastor,
Right.
but it could happen to any of us if we don't have the correct fail-safes in place.
Right.
And I've seen it multiple times. I've even seen it happen to pastors who I sat under at times.
Yeah. And I think, you said something that, we're not necessarily saying that it's your pastor or, your bishop or anyone that you may personally encounter, during your regular worship experience. But, I think the other thing is what you're saying is that we just have to be careful and be vigilant because oftentimes, we are drawn to a personality in a church. And so if they're charismatic or, if they're, especially if they're a golden orator, or in some cases, if they have sex appeal, I'm being honest. And so sometimes we're drawn to personalities, and so we kind of surrender out some of the things some of the things we should be looking for in a ministry, in a healthy ministry. Sometimes we forsake and surrender those things for the things that we can see or that make us feel good while we're there in that ministry. And so we need to be careful and be vigilant that we're not a part of a community that has those type of abuses taking place. And I'm not talking about things that happen occasionally or things or like someone said earlier, calling out sin. I'm talking about those reoccurring regular patterns of abusive type of leadership, or mind control, or whatever it is that's happening that's impacting and negatively impacting the body, and it's stunting the growth of believers. And it's causing some to fall away and not want to ever go to church again, or some just to be there but be lifeless and superficial. And so we just need to be very vigilant.
I also, before we move on to the next segment of the show, I just want to add this point here, or really it's a double point. That point number one, that please, I want to say to all aspiring church leaders, particularly pastors, please surround yourself with people who love you.
Yes.
But will challenge you and pray for you.
Yes.
Listen what I mean. You need folks that are going to ask you the hard questions. And you need folks that are just going to simply tell you no because you're dead wrong and you're out of order. And I'm talking to you, pastor. You need folks like that in your life. And you also need folks around you who are going to constantly be praying for you to keep you right on point and encouraging you and loving on you and giving you advice even at times. Kind of like a mentorship, like Elijah and Elisha, or Paul and Timothy and Titus. These things are necessary.
Yes.
Every human needs that, particularly as you descend into offices and positions of leadership. I did say descend into office. Not see, a lot of us have a warped perspective. We think that leadership means we're going higher. No, leadership should mean you're going lower. Because Jesus came to serve. He came down from heaven to serve and to give his life. Right. It was Jesus himself that said on 2 different occasions that the least among us will be the greatest. You know, and if you want to be the greatest, start serving. And I'm saying that to the pastor. I'm saying that to the bishop, the elder, the deacon, or the archbishop, or whatever titles we're using nowadays.
Yes.
Okay, so listen, friends. It is important, it is imperative that we have the A word now that is becoming a cuss word now in circles of church leadership, and it's accountability. Accountability. You need to have friends, and sometimes not friends, who you can submit your ideas to, who you can submit things to, that should include, and some of them need to be inside of your church, where they can tell you, no, that's out of order, and it's dead wrong, and it's unbiblical. It is very important that every person have accountability, but particularly even more so church leaders, because there's so much at stake. It's your spiritual well-being, it's your wife and kids' spiritual well-being, and it's also now the 50 people or the 100 people or the 500 people that are following your leadership. They're trusting you. Don't let them down. Don't hurt them. Don't crush their spirits. And Ezekiel chapter 34 is letting us know you're going to be held accountable for the way that you treat God's people. Look at James chapter 3 and verse 1. Beloved, be not many masters, knowing that you shall receive a much harsher judgment. Leadership is not something that we should rush to, but leadership is something that we need to understand. It's a much higher level of service, humility, and accountability. So I just want to read to you some items that I jotted down. I jotted down some items. How can you identify characteristics of an unhealthy church, or characteristics of an abusive church, or a pastor or leadership that may have the propensity at some point to become spiritually abusive? How can we identify them? There are certain traits and there are certain characteristics. Now, let's look at some of the stuff that I've jotted down. I've read, in my jotting this down, I've read multiple articles. I've listened to multiple teachings on this, and one gentleman in particular who has done multiple articles and teachings on this, he himself did a study for multiple years before he came out with his findings. And I'm just going to go through some of these. My wife is going to chime in as the Spirit leads her, as it rises up with her to make a comment. She's very much welcome to do so, as always, because she offers a fresh perspective, and even sometimes a lemon sprinkled twist to what it is that I say. So, but item number one. Now, how is it that we can identify an abusive church, a unhealthy or toxic church, or a church that may eventually have a propensity to go in that direction? Let's look at it. Is the government structure of your church such that there is one person at the top, or a very small handful of very powerful, close-knit group that do and say what they want? and they have no accountability, no matter how wrong they are. Is that your church? Like I said before, every person needs accountability, but the lower you go into leadership, the more accountability you need. Why? Simply because you're human. And the opportunity is always there for the flesh to twist the things of God.
Yes.
And for a demonic power to speak into your ear. You're the one in charge. You can do what you want. You can say what you want. What are they going to say? You know, I'm the one at the top. I'm the big dog.
Yeah.
Item number 2. Do you often hear language such that it is imperative that you stay submitted to authority? If it's always being preached and taught by the deacons, elders, and pastor, always being taught, stay submitted to authority. Stay submitted to authority. Stay submitted to authority. Do you hear that all the time? That's an eyebrow raiser. And that's a potential problem.
Yeah.
We need to be thinking about that, because on your jobs and on my job, I've never had a job where they always said that.
Yeah.
But we just knew what the pecking order was.
Sure.
The boss didn't have to come around and remind us every morning.
Yeah.
Stay submitted to authority. Stay submitted to authority. You know, even when you look at police officers. I mean, we know who the authority is when the police officer shows up. It's the police officer. But I should be able to greet the police officer and him not tell me stay submitted to authority. Stay submitted to authority.
Yeah.
But if it's always being said and it's always being taught, then that's an eyebrow raiser. Why are you always saying that?
Yeah.
Is it because you're trying to exalt yourself? No, ultimately, the highest authority in the universe is God and His Word.
And you know, some may refer to that as if you've been reading any books on leadership or listening to other teachers, they may refer to that as what they call power positioning. And so, you know, and don't take us lightly. There is certainly a place for teaching on spiritual authority, but if this is a subject of sermon every Sunday, or if there's a constant reminder to everyone that, you know, I am the one that's in charge, you know, that is a signal or perhaps a sign that there's trouble around the corner. And so again, you just want to be careful when, you know, there are sermons or even unofficial sermons that are taught about unconditional loyalty, that, you know, the leadership is always right, irregardless of the circumstances or the facts, that they're always right. It's this undying loyalty and obligation to be on the side of leadership. So be careful if those things, because you want to please God and not man. And so you just want to be careful and be vigilant of those things, if those things are things that are happening constantly in a ministry that you are a part of.
Number 3, is the pastor or first lady or bishop the spiritual focal point of the ministry? Even more so than the Word of God.
My Lord.
Or even God Himself. Very interesting. Do you hear language such that do you hear this type of language? And I know I've heard it, but let me put this out there. That if you honor God's man, or if you bless the man of God, then God will bless you. Do you hear that language at the place where you worship? Do you hear that on a regular basis? Well, the thing about it is, there is a certain man or woman that God blesses. But whether or not God blesses me, my relationship with God is not contingent upon how much I blessed the man of God. And the thing about it is, I could not be able to bless the man of God because I'm not there, because I'm at work. I could not be able to bless the man of God financially because I just don't have the money. But whatever the deal is, my personal relationship is with God. And God blesses me because I honor him.
Yes.
And I honor his word. That's the man that God blesses in Psalm 1. Okay, so and multiple hundreds of scriptures in the Bible. In fact, maybe we'll do a group of shows on that. How do we position ourselves to be blessed by God?
That's good.
Item number 5. Are you considered rebellious if you ask a question to leadership? Are you put on a hit list because you're able to consider a different point of view from the leadership?
Wow. It's very powerful.
Yeah, it's powerful, and it's very, very common.
Yeah.
It's very common. In fact, when I'm at work, and many of you, when you're at work, sometimes you sit in meetings, and they want your position to be different from theirs. And the reason why is because you're going to bring a fresh new perspective that we had not considered. And when you open your mouth to speak, that might be the direction we need to go in.
Yeah.
So we want folks in meetings to say different things. Everyone can't be a carbon copy
That's right.
of someone else and everyone have the same ideas. Oh, well, pastor said it, so I got to say it. Well, what if it's not efficient? What if it's not effective? What if it's just downright wrong? You know, does that mean I have to say exactly what someone else is saying? Can't I think for myself?
Yeah.
Did you want something to say?
I did. I was reading this article maybe a few weeks ago by I think his name is Michael Fewer. I think his name is Michael Fewer, and he was talking about how members who question leaders or who don't necessarily follow directives are sometimes confronted with the severe consequences. And in this story, he talks about, in this article, he talks about this family that decided to go on vacation. And they purchased some airline tickets to take a family vacation. They purchased the tickets. They finalized the rest of their plans, looking forward to some much needed time off. Well, in this article, once this pastor discovered their plans, he rebuked them for not getting his permission to go on this vacation. And he warned them not to go. Well, the family went anyway. And so they went on this vacation. And when they returned, shortly thereafter, they were visited by some of the church leadership. They were informed that by going on this vacation against the pastor's wishes, that they were in rebellion. And so they had to enforce the pastor's authority, and there had to be some form of punishment applied because they had to set an example.
We're talking about growth.
And so, yes. And so this couple was informed that they were supposed to be in isolation, so to speak. Other members from the ministry were not to contact them for whatever time was determined by the pastor. And even their children were somewhat isolated as well from other children in the ministry. Yep. And so this pastor was really operating under a spirit of control, his own spirit really, and had convinced other members and other leaders that he was accurately hearing from God. Yep. And so, this constant exposure to this type of spirit, obviously, these other members were convinced that this was right. This was the Lord's will. And so, in essence, they really had abdicated their own personal fellowship in knowing the Lord and hearing his voice, and decided what the pastor and only what the pastor said and did was what God's will was for their lives. And so, again, I know it sounds like an extreme story. I don't make this stuff up.
Actually, it's not extreme. I'm going to tell you how extreme that is not, because that literally, you should remember, if I put this out there, it literally have happened to me on more than one occasion. That has literally happened to me, and I have seen that with my own eyes, and it have happened to other people. as well as it has happened to me where, you're just living life and the pastor disagrees with what you do or say, or they have an issue with it, or you should have asked my permission, could you go on vacation, or, that was out of order, or, you whatever. And, I'm God's man, and since I'm God's man, it's from my mouth to your ears. Friends, when you see things like this, you need to immediately, that's a reason to drop to your knees
Yes.
and ask what God's direction is.
Yes. Yes.
Because that
so
is-
you can
that is-
discern the will of God for
You
your
need
life.
to really start to discern
Yes.
what's happening there, because that is in direct violation to 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 4. Let's get a little bit more, because there's so much here to say. Are you told not to touch God's anointed and do my prophet no harm when you notice that something done by leadership is blatantly wrong and downright unbiblical? Okay, so so folks in leadership are doing everything that's dead wrong. But if you say anything, touch not my anointed and do my prophet no harm. Have you seen parishioners rebuked and called out in public with no mercy, no compassion, and no privacy?
Wow.
Think about that, friends. We're talking about in a Bible study or in a worship service, folks are being called out and rebuked sharply
And
openly
openly and publicly.
in public without mercy, compassion, or privacy. Have you seen hurtful, offensive, abusive things said over the public address directed at a certain individual with no regard or discretion, with no regard for discretion or respect of that individual or their feelings? Very interesting.
Yes.
Does your ministry or church do more for the pastor than they do for the community?
He's saying something now.
I'm just putting it out there. I mean,
Yeah.
the purpose of the body of Christ, Jesus Christ will want us to reach the lost. The apostles reached the lost. Jesus himself said it. The Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost.
Right.
And you didn't see every time that there's a service, we're sowing into, every time Jesus did anything, he took up an offering for himself. Or every time Jesus did anything, the apostles took up an offering for Jesus. No. Are we doing more for the pastor than we're doing for the community? Very, very interesting question. Are you encouraged or sometimes coerced into giving financial blessings to the pastor multiple times per year above and beyond his normal salaries and allowances? We see these ministries where the pastors are driving luxury cars that their churches are purchasing for them every single year. I remember, Lord, I remember being in a church service that they actually had a green rug that they would roll out about twice a month. And I went to this church for three years. They had a green rug that they called the carpet soil. And when that carpet soil rolled out on the floor, it was a green rug, the carpet soil, and they would roll it out on the floor. That meant that you were supposed, and all leaders, of which my wife and I were leaders, were expected to give at least $20 every time that carpet soil was rolled out. It was a green rug. That means every time it came out, every leader was expected to come up and put at least $20 on it. And we were expected to do it first, because if the leadership did it, the rest of the saints would do it. And everything that was sowed into the soil, every seed that was dropped there, was going directly to the pastor. And that happened about twice a month. Come on, friends. Come on. Think about that. You can be a church leader and simply not have that type of money. to always sow into the carpet soil. Or but your position or your ability to function in that ministry is directly contingent upon how much you actually give financially to the pastor. Let's think about that. Is that the purpose of the kingdom of God?
All right.
Is that the way the word describes his kingdom? Okay, let's get a couple more here. Does the pastor frequently claim to have a special relationship with God that others can't have? Let me read that again. Does the pastor frequently claim to have a special relationship with God that others can't have? And because he has a special relationship with God, he can never be questioned. Because questioning the leaders means questioning God's will. Does your pastor have a group of yes men surrounding him that will always support him no matter what?
Yeah.
On that note, I'm going to say that if a person has a group of people around him who will always agree with him all the time, and never offer him a different perspective or challenge him with a different idea, or sometimes tell him you're just downright wrong, and we're not doing that, and we're not going to allow that to happen to God's people.
Or sometimes, just as a sounding board, just as to do a litmus check, just to see that, perhaps there is a situation that has occurred in the ministry, maybe amongst members, maybe something including the leadership, but, people who you're accountable to who are not just yes men, will give you sound advice, will give you, wisdom from the scriptures, and they won't just be concerned with gaining your approval or the leadership's approval. And so sometimes just a sounding board, just someone to redirect you back to the word and being in a position of right standing with the Lord, versus just someone to agree and stroke an ego and continue to, wreak havoc on the body. So, it could just be someone to hear and then give you the heart of God back to say, well, I really feel like the Lord is, and it might be in total contrast with what you originally came with, but it's an opportunity for you to hear the word and have a checks and balances in your spirit and in your life. And not that they're calling you into question, and not that they're challenging you, or not that they're, going against your leadership, but they're giving you the heart and the mind of God as you need it.
Yeah, and there are some times when churches have to make large, important decisions where sometimes you just simply don't make the decision. You just have 3 or 4 days of shut in fasting and prayer. And you just simply stay there until God speaks.
Yeah.
And when I say fasting, I literally mean no food.
Yeah.
Because you want to deny the flesh. You want to shut the flesh off. You don't want to hear from the flesh. You want to be sensitive to the Spirit. You want to be sensitive to God's ways. You just want to fast and pray and hold hands in a circle, and lay on your faces together, seeking God's will and worshiping God. Don't make the decision sometimes.
Yeah. Don't
call a meeting sometimes. Call a good old-fashioned Acts chapter 13, verses 1 through 6 prayer meeting. Because those are the types of places where God can speak the loudest and the clearest.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times when God makes the decision, everyone hears the exact same thing in the group, and you don't have to worry about anybody endorsing it or anybody rebelling against it. It's God's will, and if everyone in that circle is God's man or woman, then God speaks. He speaks to his people. God is mouthy. He has a lot to say. If only we could listen. You got to think the book he gave us has over 1,100 chapters in it. 33,000 verses. God has a lot to say on everything.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, we're just not in a position to listen. And that major decision that you have to make, God wants to give input.
Yeah. One of the things that I recently heard, again, this was a few weeks ago, and it was John Piper was talking about making important decisions, which you touched on a little bit. And he talked about how there were some major decisions that the church was about to make, some, major moments in ministry that they had to either reconcile. What do we do next in our next season? And these were big, important decisions that would impact the life of the ministry. And, he went to his leaders. And at this time, John Piper had been pastoring this church for 30 years. So technically, he probably could have made the decision and presented before the leaders in the congregation what the mission and the vision was. But he decided to go and employ his leaders. And together they agreed that they didn't know, but that's okay. That's okay, he said, because as long as you know that you don't know, and you know what to do about not knowing. So what they decided to do about not knowing was to have Antioch moments. And so, his leaders encouraged those Antioch moments where they would get together, for fasting and praying and reading the Bible.
That's funny. That's Acts chapter 13, verses 1 through 6.
And just trying to hear from God about direction. There were no big eyes, no little U's. We were all to come to lay before the Lord for 1 hour, singing, praying, and reading scriptures, and just waiting for the Lord to speak and to give us direction and to give us answers. But that took a lot of humility on John Piper's part, because at that point, again, he'd been pastoring for about 30 years at this point, same church. And he was at a place in his life, and a very acclaimed pastor, and author, and writer, and international speaker, a man of influence, and a man of means. And so, again, he could have employed his other bishop friends to say, let's write this vision for this ministry. But he chose to go, and he even invited members to be a part of the Antioch moments. He gave them the time, the date, and he said, even if you can't attend, even if you're in your homes, you can pray with us and pray for us during these Antioch moments. And, these are the scriptures that we're going to be reading, and this is how long we're going to be doing this on a weekly basis. And so we encourage you to be a part of the move of God. And it was a beautiful thing just to hear that, just to hear him, say that we're all, none of us are really any more than the other. We're all going to rely and wait for the Lord to give us vision and direction.
That's it. That's beautiful. Well, John Piper's that type of man. But that's a great example. We need brothers like that to be examples. And
let me tell you a little bit about this, just a little bit more. These were some big decisions. He was about to retire from ministry as pastoring, and they were talking that the church had grown so large, whether they were going to split the campuses into 3 campuses, what they were going to do about their building fund. So these were not minor decisions; these were major decisions in ministry. And so he decided that rather than make those decisions himself, that he would employ the leaders, and together they would seek the face of God on those decisions.
Wonderful example. And when you were talking about Antioch moments, that's just beautiful, because that's the way.
And that's something we can do in our personal lives,
That's what you can do in your personal life. But that's the way God's kingdom is demonstrated. God's people coming together on one accord, together. No one's concerned about titles. Mm-hmm. No one's concerned about offices, positions, authority, respect or disrespect. Mm-hmm. Folks coming together in love and unity, seeking God's face together. Mm-hmm.
And in this story, he tells, in this testimony, he tells how they all had to pull out their calendars and find a time that was convenient for all of them, including him, because they wanted all of the leaders to be at every single Antioch moment. And so again, just a demonstration of humility, of love, and of sacrifice. And the time they set was like way early, and in the crack of dawn morning, but that was their commitment, because they wanted to hear from the Lord regarding what was next in the next season of their life and in their ministry. And for 30 years, that's a long time. And so what was the Lord going to have him do next? He wasn't retiring from ministry, but he felt like at that moment, perhaps the Lord had another vessel he wanted to use to move that ministry and to move that needle forward. Again, that takes a lot of humility to recognize when your season has dawned, and perhaps it's time for God to raise up another vessel to do this work while he used you in a different capacity. And so those were some of the major decisions that they were about to, they were waiting to hear from God about in terms of what happens next at Bethel. So it's just a beautiful testimony. And there are thousands of members there. He's written tons of books, international speaker, beautiful family. And so, but again, he took the low road, or the high road, I should say. And
that is the low road.
The low road.
Once it's on anyway.
The low road, and decided that he would just not make decisions just for the benefit of his own self and his own benefit and his own good, but because it impacted the body, the entire body, and not just that particular local church, but the entire body of Christ.
Oh yeah, because he has international, worldwide acclaim and influence.
That he
so if he makes the wrong decision, there's a lot more at stake than just his name.
Exactly.
So look, friends, I want to read 3 or 4 more, then we're going to close out. And I'm just going to breeze right through them, and then we're going to close out.
Yes.
Here it is. Is it virtually impossible to leave the church on good terms?
Mm.
And sometimes with the blessing of the pastor? Is it virtually impossible to leave the church on good terms and with the blessing of the pastor? Number 15, are people shunned and their character discredited if they leave? Are people shunned and their character discredited if they leave? These are all bad signs, friends. Are people told that if they leave, they will be cursed?
My Lord.
Number 17, this is going to have to be the last one. Are people told that they will fall away if they leave the church? There you have it, friends. 17 points to consider. Are you in a healthy church? Does your church have a propensity to possibly be unhealthy? Are there different ways that we can step higher? How can we step higher? What things do we need to redress? What things do we need to address? Even as church leaders, how can we step higher? What things can we reassess? What things can we reconsider? What things are helping the saints grow? Are we putting leadership first, or are we putting God first? Are we putting God's word first? Are we all submitting together as a church to God's word?
Amen.
So, how healthy is your church? Is your church abusive? Is the leadership abusive? Are we fulfilling Ezekiel chapter 34? Are we fulfilling 1 Peter chapter 5 verses 1 through 4? And many passages that talk about how leadership should deal with those who are not leadership. Are we fulfilling the book of John? Feed my sheep. Feed my lambs. Unfortunately, friends, we come to the worst part of the show where we actually have to close out. But we want to thank everybody once again. We want to thank our regular supporters who always support us on Facebook and YouTube and Awesome God Radio. The various different ways that you check us out. Thank you so much for your support. We thank you for sharing. We thank you for your comments. We thank you for checking us out. If you like what you see, share it, check it out, and check us out. Some of our other things that we've done. And share it and let somebody know that there is a blessing right here on Awesome God Radio. Keep it right where you have it, and get ready for Get Lifted with Breezy. The Uplift Show with Breezy.
Uplift Show with Breezy.
The Uplift Show with Breezy right here on Awesome God Radio.